Basically, the robots are kind of the downtrodden, a little bit.
Are you guys okay with this window that this is blowing open and changing your light a bunch? I just noticed that.
He's blocking it.
Okay.
Actually.
Right.
But thank you.
We'll go back. I just saw the light change. I got all on edge there.
Welcome back to Crafttruck, Through the Lens. One of the best in the business, Adam Kimmel. Capote. It sort of defies like narrative structure. It defies a lot of your expectations because these guys are found guilty about 35 minutes into the movie. Really, the third act is just about Truman Capote himself slowly going into a quagmire of his own depression and self-centeredness.
And also, it's showing that he hasn't thought past this moment.
Yeah.
The ambition has been leading all of his decisions, and suddenly there are other elements in play as it unravels.
In the courtroom,
mm-hmm.
I'd have a hard time figuring out where the light is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Both in the terms of the story and in terms,
Yeah.
It's not distracting at all, but it is not boring. It's gorgeous. So what is the difference between the DP shooting TV, where everything looks flat and even and just it's not interesting at all, and what you're doing where I cannot tell what but it looks totally gorgeous?
That's an interesting question. I mean, we only know our process, but for me, once you know the movie you're making and what you want it to feel like, those things start to inform all your choices. Mm-hmm. So do you want it dramatic? Do you want shafts of light from the window? Do you want top soft light? And if so, how contrasty? How pooled is that light? Those are all, and what does the location lend itself to? I seem to remember that courtroom is a lot of wood, but I think it has light-colored walls in the back.
Yep.
And also, what fits in the schedule and the budget and all of that.
Right,
so,
right.
You're balancing all of those things in any lighting setup. In that case, I went with the sort of Gordon Willis, pooled, skirted top lights. I put them over the places where we decided the people we cared about were going to sit. You try to balance all of the things that are moving parts, but the thing that you anchor them to is, what do you want it to feel like? And what you said is sort of, that's what I wanted it to feel like. I didn't want it to be distracting. I didn't want it to feel like, shafts of light through smoky windows. Like, I wanted it to feel in the period and within the palette and not distracting, but not flat. I wanted there to be drama in it. And it was probably the hardest thing for us to decide about blocking in and maybe for lighting. Because, if you go to the execution...
Yeah. It was exactly what I was going to talk about. The hanging, the execution, probably the most dramatically lit thing in the movie.
Right. And I took liberties there because it's in a warehouse. It was at night, that execution. It's not a theatrical presentation. It's utilitarian light, and it's a somber mood. So I took liberties in that of like, what are the lights? How poolly are they? Where do we expose it? I mean, one of my favorite moments in that is this moment where you see all these men turn and look, and a light sweeps across their faces, and it's the car headlight arriving with the killers in it for the execution. It's just one of those moments where in the course of blocking it, Bennett and I were just like, let's have a light sweep across their face. And to me, it's one of those moments where the whole movie just sort of changes tone in that beat. Found, in the circumstance, one of those.
That's very Conrad Hall.
Yeah, I learned a lot from listening to him talk about how he arrived at things.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, I just had this conversation with someone on set the other day. When I'm lighting something, even if I have it figured out down to the last single piece of equipment, I never walk away. I never say, yeah, put the light up, I'll come back. I mean, you put a light up in a crane, when that light starts moving up there, even though you're waiting for it to get to where you asked for it, you have 1,000 chances to see something you wouldn't have thought of. I love that. Yes, all the time.
Very cool. Was it necessary to sort of work around visually making Phillip Seymour Hoffman look tiny?
For sure.
I mean, there's a scene where he's in a robe.
He and Catherine Keener.
Yeah, and it looked like, I'm like, he's not really that short, is he?
Well, it's everything. I mean, Phil's a lot bigger than Truman was.
Right.
And so whenever we have him with other people, he's there on boxes. If you look at the opening party done in New York, he's telling a story to a lot of people,
Yep.
and he's the smallest one there.
Yep.
Ideally, you sell that stuff early in the film, and then you stop. You know, okay, character introduction, first time we see him next to Nell. So we really need to know what the relationship is between them, and then we do try to maintain it. There's a scene where they pull up to the house and park a car and get out, and Truman walks forward, and then Nell walks forward behind him and stops, and she's quite a bit taller than him. There's a little ramp of boxes for her, so she can only walk where we put the boxes down. But I think if you sell that a few times early on, it stops becoming as much of a...
Is that nerve-wracking at all, doing that?
Yeah, we were all concerned about that.
Yeah, because you're like, I hope this looks right, And
also, consistency is important.
Right.
Nothing's worse than when one moment jumps out because it's not like the others. But we all paid attention to it, and everybody was aware of the concern, and we all knew Phil was the person that was going to play this part from the beginning. So everything we did was designed to sort of make that not an issue.
The sequence in which Capote convinces the New Yorker to photograph these guys with a fashion photographer, have to imagine is a little bit nerve-wracking for a DP, because now you're trying to emulate a situation with a light that's diegetic, it's in the story world, or Dick
Avedon shot those stills of those guys.
Did you shot all those stills, obviously, or your guy?
No, I think in the end, I had a Hasselblad, which is my camera, which, by the way, is not true to the history of it. He shot with a Rolleiflex.
A Rollie.
We got bad advice from the research department on that.
Use a Hasselblad.
Yeah. And the sound of it,
that just ruins the whole
sound of
movie
it gives it away. You can hear that Hasselblad shutter.
Right.
No, the stills were done several times, but I didn't actually shoot while we were doing that. It was hard enough lighting the scene, then being in the scene. What's funny about that is that in the close-ups, I'm holding not the Hasselblad, but a video monitor so I can watch Bennett's framing, because he's now operating the camera. So I'm watching the shot of me behaving like I'm shooting stills. In the wide shots, I have the Hasselblad in my hand. So it was kind of a circus that day. I think Spike Jonze was going to play that part, actually.
You're going to play the photographer.
He was going to play Avedon, and the timing didn't work, and you had to get work permits to fly people in as actors. So Phil Hoffman's the one that wound up saying, he was friends with Dick, and they had just done a shoot together before the movie. And he wound up saying to me, "You should do this." And I was like, "I don't look anything like him, and I'm kind of busy shooting the movie." And he's like, "You should do it. It's the right, instead of putting an actor in there and teaching him how to hold a camera, you're a photographer, you have the energy of Avedon, get in there."
Yeah, Dick's a very famous fashion photographer. World famous.
I gotta be in a fashion magazine.
So there's no worry of having a bad picture.
Yeah, that film's really, it was small, and it has and I mean this in a good way, a really handmade feel to it.
Yeah, but beautifully handmade.
Yeah, but I think that's right. It's like all of the exteriors in Canada, the blowing wheat fields and the tree skylines and the barns.
Farmhouse.
I did all of that stuff in one afternoon solo, like not even with a camera assistant. I was loading mags in the back of my rental car, building the camera in a wheat field, and shooting all that stuff in one afternoon in pre-production. That and Never Let Me Go are the two films people tend to pull out and say, those are the films that I found your work through. And a film called Jesus Son as well, that's had a nice shelf life.
Tell us about that.
Well, that's 12, 13 years ago now? Mm-hmm. No, 14 years ago this year. Yeah, tiny, under $2 million, 28-day.
What's it about?
It is a Dennis Johnson short story collection, and it's a single narrative film that tries to take all of these short stories and connect them in a kind of non-linear way. Much more so in the original script than the finished film. I think the last third of the film is very linear now, but the script that we were working with was this disjointed, jumping forward and backward in time, recurring characters, just a DP dream. And also set in the 70s against a drug culture background, and in the Midwest, although we shot it all in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and the surrounding areas. And it's
great place to shoot Philadelphia, by the way.
Amazing.
But just visually, it's like
amazing.
I think people from LA go there and go like, it isn't New York, and it's clearly not New York, but it's got such a great architecture.
There's a time warp, or there was at that point. I haven't shot anything in those areas since, but yeah, it was just right for that film. The trains, the elevated trains there are so specific, and beautiful. Like in New York, everything's much newer and has been for a long time, but there you could find these old trains with graffiti and lights that flickered on and off, and incredible locations. There's several times when he rides on the train and he's always in a state of emotional despondency. And the train becomes this sort of train ride to hell, and the lights are flickering on and off, and there are characters that are in the shadows and very, very shady, and he winds up following one of them, and it becomes a whole other, I mean, it's a kind of dark journey of the soul, and what we were able to do on film with no resources and no time feels like that to me. So when I think of that film and I think of the things visually that work the best, that's the top of it. There were things we shot for the film, even though we only had 28 days, we shot a movie that was over 3 hours in the first assembly. So there's like a movie and a half in 28 days. And some of the stuff that did not make the cut was some of my favorite stuff. That was always a hard one. It took me a while to just kind of look at the movie for what it was rather than for what it could have been. Or, you know, I think the film's great. It holds up really well. But there were some sequences that we worked on with a lot of great ideas behind them that just didn't fit, you know.
Such is the nature of the knife, right?
Yeah. But it's funny when it's a 28-day shoot and you're working so hard to get the script that's on paper, on film, you feel like you fought that much harder for it. And so
Right.
it ought to be in the movie.
So it Never Let Me Go also an action, like a real landmark for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's different than anything I've done, and it feels to me like the culmination of a lot of things that I've worked on and cared about. You follow children through a sort of off-kilter British boarding school in a period that's not quite defined, somewhere in the 70s is the assumption. And partway through it, you discover, as they do, that they're actually being raised to donate organs, and that they've perfected cloning at this point, and that the way that they're dealing with this is needing organs by cloning children, and then there are these clones. So if you're, I guess the book goes deeper into it, but the premise is that either if you're wealthy enough to have yourself cloned when you're young, then you have a spare parts version of you, or they're just spare parts that they can transplant. But the kids find out at like 12 or 13 years old. And so the movie is essentially...
It's a drama with a science fiction backdrop.
It is. And the science fiction is just sort of the device by which you arrive at a story that's about a life compressed. You know, the thing that really drew me to it was not at all the science fiction, but the idea that even if you knew you were going to die at 25, you could still live a life that had all the arc of a life in it. And there's a great line at the end of it that sums that up, which says, the main character who's about to go into the donations and ultimately die says something along the lines of, it occurs to me in the end that we're not that different from the people whose lives we save, that when it's over, we'll still wonder what it was for and wish we had more time. And that was the line that just sort of stuck. It made me feel like that's a worthwhile thing to explore. And I like movies that relate to the human condition in some way, and that you hope everybody will find a connection to that likes the movie.
Right.
In more than an entertaining way. I mean, I think beyond that, there's a
thoughtful way.
A thoughtful way, in a way that feels personal. You know, I think that's what people walk away from movies saying, I love that movie, because something feels personal in it. So I look for that. I think as a DP, you kind of owe that to the project.
Why don't you tell me about your favorite, your most prized sequence in Never Let Me Go?
I would have to say that there's only one set in that film, and it's the dorm room where the kids sleep. And there's a sequence where the movie transitions from the 12 or 13-year-old kids to the 18-year-old kids. And we did it in that dorm room. After you've seen several scenes play out there, Kathy is sitting alone on the bed looking through this little box of the only possession she owns. And in the course of seeing her going through the box, looking at her hand, opening it, and coming back to the wider shot, she becomes an 18-year-old version of the character. And it's played empty except for her in very Never Let Me Go, somber light. And there's 2 wide shots when she stands up to walk out, and it's kind of the end of a sequence. And I just felt in the end like everything worked together. The design of the set, which we all were very involved in, the art direction, the palette, the lighting, the camera placement, the whole thing. When I look at that sequence, I just feel like if I could do it 10 more times, I don't know what I would change. and that's
a big
not
deal.
something we get to say very often.
No,
you know?
no. Let's talk specifically about I'm Here, the short that you made with Spike Jonze. I think it's a beautiful example of your photography. It's a beautiful example of great filmmaking. It is great filmmaking. It's not an example. It is great filmmaking. The concept for this short is that robots with effectively really rudimentary heads and
Like early 70s. Yeah.
do the menial jobs in society, and there's this wonderful sequence at the beginning where you paint the world by just virtue of going on a bus. And then there's this lonely single robot, and he meets this girl, robot. She keeps getting into accidents, he keeps giving up more of himself for her. The style of photography was so, I don't want to use the word loose, it just felt natural, and at the same time you had like this color, this warm, constant color palette that was kind of, with a little bit of hint of green, if I'm not mistaken, through the whole thing.
Because there's a lot of fluorescent lit interiors and industrial spaces, and you know, Spike's, and I had never shot with Spike, so this was our first thing.
How did you get the
together.
call for that?
We've known each other a long time, and he visited the set of Never Let Me Go. He and Mark Romanek are good friends.
Yeah.
So when he was visiting in London, he went in the edit room one day, and Mark just showed him dailies, basically, because we were early in shooting. There was nothing cut. I don't think there was, but he went out and started telling people how amazing he thought the film looked. And he met Andrew Garfield there. And so we had just wrapped, I think we wrapped in June in London, and this was maybe late July.
So you had to work fast on this.
We had to work really fast. I mean, the funny story about that is that it started out as a 6 or 8 minute film, I think, with a 6 or 8 minute script. And we had 4.5 days to shoot it.
6 or 8, and then Spike started writing.
He started writing, and he kept writing. I mean, he wrote that thing completely, and he's normally written with other people, so that was new for him, as well as a love story, if you think about it.
Yep.
And at one point, the script became almost finished, and he was sending updates, but it became almost finished at like 25 pages. And I remember the moment when I said to Vince, his producer, so how much time are we going to have to shoot this? And he said,
4.5
the
days.
same. Yeah. So that's what the job became about in many ways, was there were locations on that film that Spike and I pulled up, got out of the car, figured out how to shoot it, and then shot it all in one visit. Like there was no pre-scout. There was a night shoot in a parking lot which needed to be pre-scouted, so we found that location.
Sort of walking around. That was beautiful.
Yeah, I love how that scene looks.
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting color in that, which I put a big light up over them and made it that color, but there were lights in the parking lot that were a similar color, and you know, I kept reading them and trying to match them with gel, and we put a balloon light up and put, I think there were 6 layers of gel under it to get it to match the parking lot. It was the weirdest color.
So you're saying in order, you actually had to try a little bit of magenta,
I wanted to supplement
a little bit of this.
Layers and layers of full blue, multiple full blues, lots of plus green. I mean, normally you're putting like a blue light with a little more blue and a little green to get it in the zone of vapor lights. Whatever those lights were, they were so extreme. They were like purple and green mixed. And we went for it, and I wasn't able to test it, but that's what I graded.
And it worked.
I love how it looks. It's so unique.
The concert sequence where she first gets
falls apart. Yeah.
Very clever. Did you have enough toys to make it, you know, I mean...
Yeah, we approached everything the same way on that film, which is we know what we absolutely need, and we'll keep going to see how much more we can get. So that was a live band. It was a big crowd. I lit the room, sort of the whole room, so that I could shoot in any direction. We took 2 cameras. Spike took one, and I took one. We went into the crowd. I brought a little bit of supplementary fill light, like a handheld fluorescent, that I could just carve her out of the darkness if she got too lost. But basically, it was practical. So there's a show on stage. There's a little bit of ambience for the room. The show on stage, I designed to have these pulses of ultra bright white light.
Yep.
Knowing that that would carry into the middle of the room. The whole scene we care about is in the crowd. So I sort of set the exposures so that when those lights pulsed, you could find things, and when they went out, you were kind of lost. And there was a strobe in the darkness so that you would never be totally lost.
So a lot of it was in camera, like as far as...
That's all in camera.
All in camera.
But
Awesome.
I like to work that way. I mean, I have to say, and Mark Romanek pointed this out to me before we did Never Let Me Go.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was a really interesting observation. He said, you tend to light the spaces, not the people in them.
Harris-Savides.
Yeah. I never realized, yeah, he's right. I'm actually really adverse to that thing of, I mean, you have to add or subtract or change light for someone in a room, but if the space doesn't already feel organic to where the light comes from, then carving that person out doesn't help.
It's fantastic. It's just such confident filmmaking. You know, it really is confident filmmaking because it just you shot at film, by the way.
Yeah.
Which
35 film.
35 film.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that the style of it comes out of, yes, we had 4.5 days, but maybe that's why Spike was drawn to me, is that there is a sparseness and a simplicity, the way the shots are put together. The light is all natural. Nothing feels like you're kind of manipulating the reaction you're getting from people. You're just, I love when it feels found, but found beautiful.
I had the scariest dream last night. I was trying to get away, and these plants, they were attacking me, they were chasing me. It was so scary. And the vines were like grabbing at me, and they were trying to kill me. And they were like pulling me down into the ground, they were trying to tear me apart. And right before I died, I woke up.
Oh. You're a good dreamer.
Adam Kimmel, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great to have you.
Yeah, that was easy.